In an old abandoned house on the outskirts of a small town hung the portrait of Mr. Gary Hopkins. The house, surrounded by dense forest, had long become the subject of local legends and scary stories. It was said to be cursed, and no one dared to approach it after sunset. But the most eerie element of the house was the portrait that hung in the main living room. Mr. Gary Hopkins was a renowned artist in his time, but his life was full of mysteries and enigmas. He disappeared under strange circumstances, leaving behind only this portrait. It was said that he made a deal with dark forces to make his art immortal. But the price was high. His soul was trapped in the portrait, and now he waited for his victims to switch places with them and be freed. Years passed, and the house gradually fell into ruin, but the portrait remained untouched, as if time had no power over it. Legends of the curse were passed down from generation to generation, and the house became a place avoided by all the town's residents. One day, a young artist named Thomas arrived in the town. He was ambitious and seeking inspiration for his works. Hearing about the old house and its grim history, he decided it was the perfect place to create a masterpiece. Despite the warnings of the locals, Thomas set off for the house. When he entered the living room, his gaze was immediately drawn to the portrait of Mr. Gary Hopkins. The face in the portrait seemed alive, the eyes following Thomas's every move. But the young artist was not afraid. He was captivated by the craftsmanship and details of the painting. Thomas decided to stay in the house overnight to fully immerse himself in the atmosphere and find inspiration. He laid out his supplies and began to paint. Time passed and the night grew darker. Suddenly, he felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching him. He turned around and saw the eyes in the portrait glowing with a sinister light. Thomas tried to leave, but his feet seemed glued to the floor. He felt an invisible force pulling him towards the portrait. At that moment, he realized that the legends were true. Mr. Gary Hopkins had been waiting for his victim, and now his time had come. The light in the room went out, and Thomas felt his body begin to change. He tried to scream, but his voice would not obey him. In the last moment, he saw the face in the portrait start to come to life, and his own reflection disappeared. When the light returned, a new portrait hung in the living room. It depicted Thomas, his eyes full of horror and despair. And Mr. Gary Hopkins, now in Thomas's body, stood before the painting and smiled. He was free, and Thomas was forever trapped in the portrait, waiting for his next victim. Since then, the house once again became the subject of terrifying legends. No one dared to approach it, knowing that the portrait of Mr. Gary Hopkins awaited its next victim to switch places and gain freedom once more.
Заходи в мою обитель, будешь дорогой мне зритель. Я тебе спектакль волшебный покажу. Ну а коль не согласишься, сам в картину превратишься и начнешь висеть, как я, вешу.